The Christmas tree was still lit when my mother opened the front door, looked me in the eyes, and said, "This isn't a good time, Claire. We'll call you." Behind her, I could see my brother Daniel pouring wine at the dining table. My Aunt Sandra was laughing at something my father had just said. And standing near the fireplace holding a glass of eggnog and wearing the burgundy sweater I had gifted her last year was my best friend of 11 years, Rachel. I stood on the porch with a tin of homemade cookies in my hands and the winter air cutting through my coat, and I understood in that moment, with a clarity that felt almost violent, that whatever was happening inside that house had been planned long before tonight. "You'll call me," I repeated. My mother smiled the way she always did when she wanted to end a conversation without technically starting one. Tight lips, eyes somewhere past my shoulder. "We just have some family things to discuss. You understand?" I nodded. I told her I understood. I walked back to my car, set the cookies on the passenger seat, and sat there in the dark for a long moment watching the warm light glow through the living room curtains. Then I drove home and tried to figure out what I had done wrong. The answer, I would learn over the next several weeks, was nothing. I had done nothing wrong at all. What I had done was exist. Ask questions, notice things, and refuse to quietly disappear the way my family had decided I should. Let me back up. My name is Claire Merritt. I am 31 years old. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the second of 2 children, and for most of my life I believed my family was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. My father ran a regional property management firm that his own father had built from nothing. My mother managed the bookkeeping, which I later understood meant she managed the paper trail. My brother Daniel, 4 years older than me, had been groomed since childhood to take over the business. And I had gone to college for accounting, come home, and taken a job at the firm because my father asked me to, and because at 24 I had believed that working together meant belonging together. I was good at my job. That was never the issue. I caught errors, flagged inconsistencies, built systems that made the quarterly audits faster and cleaner. My father told me once that I had a gift for finding things that didn't want to be found. I thought he meant it as a compliment. I don't think that anymore. For 3 years I worked inside that firm and I kept my head down and I was proud of what I contributed. But in the summer before that Christmas, I started noticing things I couldn't unfind. A vendor account that didn't match any service I recognized. Maintenance invoices for properties that, as far as I could tell, had no maintenance performed. Small amounts, spread across dozens of transactions. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't specifically looking, and the kind of thing that, once you started looking, you couldn't stop seeing. I brought it to my father in August. I kept my voice even and professional. I told him I'd found some irregularities I wanted to walk him through. He looked at my spreadsheet for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "I'll have Daniel take a look." "I think it should go to the auditors," I said. "I'll have Daniel take a look, Claire." That was the end of the conversation. 2 weeks later, my access to the billing system was quietly restricted. A password I'd used for 2 years stopped working. When I asked our office manager about it, she told me IT had done a general permissions update. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. I started keeping notes, dates, amounts. What I remembered seeing before my access was cut. It felt paranoid. Sitting at my kitchen table at night writing things down in a spiral notebook. But some part of me had already understood what my father's non-answer meant, and that part of me was not willing to pretend otherwise. In October, Daniel called me into his office and told me the firm was restructuring my role. My new position would focus on client communications rather than financial oversight. He used phrases like playing to your strengths and exciting transition. And he kept his hands very still on the desk the way he did when he was trying to project calm. I told him I wasn't interested in client communications. He told me the decision had already been made. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I'd find another job and move on and let whatever was happening in that building be someone else's problem. I told Rachel over dinner that same week, and she listened and nodded and told me I was better off out of there. She squeezed my hand across the table and said, "You don't need them." I believed her. Rachel was the kind of friend who made you believe things. I found a new job at a regional accounting firm in November. It paid less than I had been making, but the work was clean and no one looked at me sideways in the hallway. I was rebuilding, I was fine. And then Christmas came and my mother opened the door and I was standing on the porch with a tin of cookies, and I was not fine at all. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in the dark and ran through the sequence of events in my mind, and something kept snagging. Rachel. Why was Rachel there? She had texted me 3 days earlier asking what I was getting my dad for Christmas. She had asked about my plans for the holiday. She had given no indication that she herself would be spending Christmas Eve at my parents' house. The only explanation I could construct was that she had been invited specifically and that she had accepted specifically, and that neither of those things had anything to do with coincidence or festive goodwill. I texted her the next morning. Just a simple, "Hey, saw you through the window last night. Everything okay?" She didn't respond for 6 hours. When she did, she wrote, "Oh my gosh, I felt so bad about that. Your mom invited me weeks ago. I didn't know things were weird between you guys. Are you okay?" I read the message several times. She had known for weeks, and she had said nothing. Not a single word across 3 dinners, 2 coffee dates, and a very long phone call in which I had told her about losing my job and my complicated feelings about my family, and she had listened and nodded and said, "You don't need them." I wrote back, "I'm fine. Talk soon." I did not talk soon. I did not talk soon. I needed to think. In early January, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single folded piece of paper with a handwritten note that said, "You were right about what you found. There's more. If you want to know, I'm not hard to find. D." I stared at that note for a long time. I asked myself all the reasonable questions. Was this a setup? Was someone trying to draw me back into something I'd already been pushed out of? Was this my family testing whether I would make trouble? But underneath all of that was the fact that I had been right. Someone else knew it. And whoever G was, they were reaching out to me. Not to my brother, not to my father, not to any of the people with power inside that company. To me. I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my old spiral notebook. It took me 2 weeks of careful asking around to figure out who G was. His name was Gerald Paxton, and he had been the firm's external auditor for 6 years until he was quietly let go the previous spring. Right around the same time I had brought my concerns to my father. He was 63 years old, recently retired to a house 40 minutes outside the city, and when I knocked on his door on a Saturday afternoon in late January, he opened it like he had been expecting me. "You look like your father," he said. Same eyes, different expression. He made coffee. We sat at his kitchen table, and he told me what he had found. It was not small. That was the first thing I understood. What I had seen, the phantom vendors, the false invoices, was the visible surface of something that went much deeper. For at least 4 years, money had been flowing out of client escrow accounts through a layered network of shell entities, eventually landing in accounts connected to my father and my brother. Tenant security deposits that were never returned. Maintenance fees collected and never spent. Repair invoices submitted to property owners for work that didn't exist. Real people had been affected. Renters who never got their deposits back. Small property owners who had trusted the firm with their buildings and had been systematically overcharged for years. Gerald had found it. He had brought it to my father. My father had thanked him and let him go the following week. "I should have reported it then," Gerald told me. He was quiet for a moment. I kept thinking someone inside would do something, that it would correct itself. He looked at his coffee cup. It didn't correct itself. He had documentation. Years of it, carefully preserved, copies of the records he had access to before he was terminated, alongside the notes he had made when he recognized what he was seeing. He slid a folder across the table. "What you do with this is your decision," he said. "But I think you already know what it should be." I drove home with that folder on the passenger seat where the cookies had been 6 weeks earlier. I sat in my apartment and I went through every page, and when I was done, I made a list of everyone who had been harmed. Families I didn't know. People who had trusted my family's name. I thought about my father's voice in August. "I'll have Daniel take a look." I thought about my brother's still hands on his desk. I thought about Rachel and her burgundy sweater. I called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia Holloway, and she was a former federal prosecutor who now handled financial fraud cases in private practice. She was 51 years old, practical and direct, and when I laid out what I had in front of her, she did not look surprised. She looked focused. "This is a civil matter and potentially a criminal one," she told me. "Depending on whether any of this involved federally regulated transactions, it may also be a federal matter." "What are my obligations?" I asked. "Right now, none, but if you want to pursue this, there are several paths. State Attorney General's office, the FBI has a fraud division, or we file a civil suit on behalf of the harmed parties and let the resulting discovery shake things loose." She looked at me steadily. "None of these paths are fast, and your family will know it was you." "They already shut me out," I said. "There's nothing left for them to take." She nodded slowly. "Then let's talk about where to start." The next few months were the hardest of my life in a specific, grinding way that's difficult to describe. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork and phone calls and waiting. And in between all of that, the ordinary experience of continuing to exist while the people who were supposed to love you were people you could no longer speak to. My mother called once in February. She said she'd heard I had been asking questions around town. She said she hoped I would think carefully before doing anything that would embarrass the family. I told her I was thinking very carefully. She said, "Claire, please." I said I would talk to her soon, and I hung up and sat very still for a while. Daniel texted me in March. He offered me money. He did not specify what the money was for or what he expected in exchange. He used the phrase "a fresh start" twice. I did not respond. I lost 8 pounds without meaning to. I started running in the mornings because it was the only time my mind went quiet. I called my college roommate Jess in Denver every Sunday and told her how things were going, and she listened in the way that Gerald had described Rachel listening, except that Jess actually meant it. In April, I finally told Jess about Rachel, about the sweater and the eggnog, and the 6 hours before she texted back. "Did she know?" Jess asked. "About the money?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe not the specifics, but she knew enough to choose a side and not tell me." "That's its own thing," Jess said quietly. "It was its own thing," Jess said quietly. "It was its own thing." It took me a while to let myself feel it fully, longer than I expected, because Rachel and I had been friends since we were 20, and some of my most important memories had her in them, and grief about a friendship is slower and stranger than other kinds, but eventually I let myself feel it, and eventually the feeling passed the way feelings do, and I came out the other side knowing something I hadn't let myself know before, that I had been lonely inside that friendship for a long time, and that her choosing my family's side had not been a betrayal so much as a revelation. By summer, the investigation had grown larger than Patricia had initially projected. The state attorney general's office had opened a case. 3 former tenants had agreed to participate as plaintiffs in the civil suit. Gerald Paxton gave a formal deposition that lasted 2 days. I was not at the center of the story by then. The attorneys and investigators were, and the harmed parties whose deposits and overcharges formed the backbone of the case. But I had been the one to connect Gerald to Patricia. I had been the one to hand over the spiral notebook with its 3 months of careful observations. And I had been the one to say yes when every easier, quieter option had been available to me. In September, my father was formally charged. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of client funds. Daniel was named as a co-defendant in the civil suit. My mother, it was determined, had known about the scheme for at least 2 years. She had managed the books that concealed it. She was not criminally charged, but was named in the civil proceedings. The family firm, which had operated for 26 years, closed its doors. I heard about most of this secondhand, through Patricia and through news alerts I had set up. I didn't go to the courthouse. I didn't need to watch it happen. I had done what I could do, and now it was in other hands, and the families who had lost their deposits would receive settlements, and the people who had built that fraud would face the accounting they had spent years avoiding. I called Gerald when I heard about the charges. He picked up on the second ring. "How are you feeling?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Like I should have done this 3 years ago." "You did it when you could," I said. "So did you," he said. "So did you," he said. That was the conversation. It was enough. I spent Christmas that year in Denver with Jess. Her apartment was small and her two cats knocked the ornaments off the tree at least 4 times, and we made a mess of a pie recipe we found online and stayed up too late talking about everything and nothing. On Christmas Eve, she handed me a glass of wine and said, "How does this one feel, compared to last year?" I thought about my mother's face in the doorway. The tight smile. The light from inside the house that I had been standing outside of. "Like I'm on the right side of the door," I said. Jess smiled. She clinked her glass against mine. "I want to be honest about what I didn't get from all of this, because I've seen enough stories where the ending wraps everything clean, and I don't want to give you a version of events that isn't true." I didn't get an apology. My father sent a letter through his attorney in October that was framed as a personal note, but Patricia told me not to engage with it, and I didn't. My mother has not contacted me since the February call. Daniel sent one last text in August. 2 words. "Why, Claire?" Not a question, a statement. I didn't answer it. I also didn't get Rachel back. She sent a long message in the fall after the charges became public, full of phrases like "I had no idea how bad it was," and "I was put in an impossible position." Maybe both of those things were true. I read her message carefully and I thought about it for several days, and then I wrote back, "I believe you. I hope you're well." That was all I had to say. What I did get was something harder to name. A kind of steadiness I hadn't known I was missing. When you grow up inside a family that needs you to be a certain shape, you learn to hold yourself in ways that aren't quite natural, and you do it for so long you stop noticing the tension. It wasn't until I stopped, until everything fell apart and I chose something difficult and true over something comfortable and false, that I realized how much of my energy had been going into maintaining a version of myself that served everyone except me. I am not in contact with my family. I don't know if that will change. I hope, somewhere at the back of myself, that my parents eventually find their way to accountability and honesty, because I was raised to believe in those things and I still do. And I think the world goes better when people find their way to them, even if it takes a long time. But I cannot hold space for that hope in a way that costs me my own clarity. What I have now is a job I'm good at, a city I've started to love after years of only half committing to it, and a small group of people who know exactly who I am and have chosen me specifically. Jess, who calls every Sunday without fail. Gerald Paxton, who sends me updates about the restitution process with the dry humor of a man who has seen enough of the world to keep things in perspective. A few colleagues who have become real friends. My cat, who I adopted in November and who has no opinion about any of this, which I find enormously restoring. Last month, I drove past the old family firm building. There was a leasing sign in the window and the parking lot was empty. I looked at it for a moment from the road and felt very little, actually. Less than I expected. Then the light changed and I kept driving. If you are in something like what I was in, if you have seen things you can't unfind and the people around you are asking you to stay quiet and call it loyalty, I want to say this carefully because I know it is not a simple thing. The cost of silence compounds. Every month you pay it, the debt gets larger, and the people asking you to pay it are not the ones who will be there when the bill finally comes due. You already know what to do. You've known for a while. The hard part isn't the knowing. Thank you for being here and for listening. I hope wherever you're spending your holidays this year, you're on the right side of the door.